I was 13 when I woke up in the middle of the goddamn forest. Not in a tent, not by a campfire, not on a trail, just standing there, barefoot, confused, shivering, alone. My breath fogged in the night air, and the distant sounds of crickets and frogs should have been calming. But instead, they felt like part of some surreal, pulsing rhythm that I'd interrupted by becoming suddenly aware. We were at a summer camp, one of those rustic ones, in the middle of nowhere, where the only walls around you were trees, and the stars overhead felt close enough to touch. Each cabin group had its own platform tent, wooden floor, canvas flaps, 4 bunks. That was home for 2 weeks. Most nights I slept like the dead, exhausted from canoeing, hiking, and all the forced socializing with kids I'd never see again. But that night was different. The first few seconds after I opened my eyes were pure blank terror. I wasn't in bed. My toes were pressed into cool soil. I remember looking down and seeing my feet, pale and filthy, half covered in leaves. The forest floor was rough with roots and pine needles. I had no shoes, no flashlight. I wasn't even wearing a shirt. Just my gym shorts and the thin string of panic building in my chest. It took me a moment to convince myself I was awake. For a second, I wondered if I was dreaming. I whispered out loud to test it, "Hello?" And the sound of my voice made everything feel real. Too real. The trees around me were massive black shadows. The moon hung low and full, giving everything a silver sheen. It was quiet, way too quiet. Then I panicked. Where the hell was I? How far had I gone? I couldn't see the tents, the lake, the dining hall, nothing familiar. Just miles and miles of dense, indifferent trees. I tried to retrace something, a feeling, a sense. Nothing. I had no memory of getting there. The last thing I remembered was climbing into my sleeping bag after flashlight tag and talking with one of the other kids about how much we hated the food. Then, black. Now, this. My heart was hammering so hard it made my ears ring. I felt dizzy and sick. The only explanation I could think of in that moment was sleepwalking. It had never happened before. But I'd heard of it. And what else could it be? I'd somehow unzipped the tent, stepped down the stairs, wandered past the other sleeping kids and counselors, and into the dark woods, barefoot and half-dressed, like a goddamn ghost. But that raised a more chilling question. How far had I gone? And why hadn't anyone stopped me? I turned slowly, in a circle, trying to orient myself. Every direction looked the same. It was the lights that saved me. Or maybe they didn't. Maybe they were the bait. Off in the distance, faint, low and warm-colored, I spotted what looked like a few lanterns or flashlights flickering between the trees. It didn't feel right. For some reason, the lights weren't moving. Not like people would if they were searching for a lost kid. They just hovered, steady and still, like they were waiting. I told myself that was the camp, that someone had left the mess hall lights on, that maybe a counselor was up late by the fire, that I just had to walk toward them. But a part of me, the ancient part, the part that still hides under blankets when the wind howls, whispered that maybe the forest hadn't let me go just yet. I picked a direction toward the lights and started walking, careful with every step. The ground was cold and sharp, and I winced with every stick and rock I stepped on. But I was too scared to stop, too scared to even breathe hard. After maybe 5 minutes, I started hearing voices. Not close, not clear, just murmuring, low and indistinct, like a radio playing from another room. I froze. The lights were closer now, flickering through the trees. And the murmurs grew just a bit louder. It didn't sound like any of the camp counselors. It sounded like a language I didn't recognize. Rhythmic. Strange. I wanted to call out, but my throat locked up. Something was wrong. I could feel it. Not like fear. Not exactly. Like pressure. Like something watching. Then, all at once, I remembered what I'd been dreaming. It was the woods, but not empty. In my dream, the trees had been breathing, rising and falling like lungs. And there were figures standing among them, tall and faceless, made of bark and mist. They didn't speak, they just hummed, and I followed. I wanted to follow. My stomach dropped. I stopped walking and turned, veering away from the lights. I didn't know where I was going, just not toward them. It was pure instinct now. My bare feet were bleeding, but I didn't care. I stumbled and tripped and clawed through brambles and ferns, my breath hitching in my chest. At some point, I started sobbing. Silent, terrified sobs. Eventually, miraculously, I saw something familiar. A tree with a carved heart and 2 initials. One of the older kids had shown it to us earlier in the week, claiming it was haunted. I turned hard left, ran through a stand of pine trees, and there it was, the campfire pit, cold and dark. And beyond that, the outline of my tent. I nearly collapsed with relief. I climbed the stairs, quietly unzipped the flap, and crawled back into my sleeping bag. Nobody stirred. Everyone else was still asleep. I lay there, soaked in sweat, my feet muddy and cut, trying to convince myself I had just sleepwalked. That was it, just sleepwalking. But I never did again. Not once, before or since. And no one at camp mentioned seeing me leave that night. No one heard a thing. Here's what really haunts me, though. That next morning, I woke up to find muddy footprints leading up the tent stairs, my own. And next to them, barely visible, almost brushed away, was a second set, larger, wider, with long, splayed toes, like someone or something had been walking beside me. When I asked the counselor about the lights in the woods, he just looked confused and said, "There aren't any lights out there, not past the fire pit." I never went back to that camp. And sometimes, late at night, when I can't sleep, I wonder if I really woke up in that forest, or if I was led there. If I had just been standing still when I came to, then what had I been doing before that moment? And who or what was I with? Because I swear, those footprints beside mine, they weren't walking away from the woods. They were walking back. Two years ago, I was working as a tree planter out of a remote bush camp in Saskatchewan. For those unfamiliar with the job, tree planting in Canada isn't just a seasonal gig. It's a lifestyle, a rite of passage, a grinding routine of long hours, muddy hands, and aching backs. It also means weeks or months spent in remote wilderness, often far from roads, cell service, or even the nearest hint of civilization. We slept in tents, cooked over fires, and learned to coexist with nature in all its brutal beauty. This particular story took place on the second to last night of our season. The end was near and spirits were high. A small group of us had gathered around the campfire after our final workday to celebrate, unwind, and nurse our bruises with cheap beer and laughter. It was one of those long, hazy nights where time slips by unnoticed. Slowly, people drifted off to their tents, until I found myself alone with the embers of the fire, still awake and craving one last beer. I stumbled back to my tent, weaving a little, my boots crunching softly on the pine needles. The bush was dark and quiet, the fire a faint flicker behind me. I unzipped my tent, reached into the cooler, and grabbed a lukewarm can of beer. Then, as I turned to step back out, I caught movement in my periphery. Something was running through the center of camp. My first thought, one of the dogs. But it moved wrong, lower to the ground, smoother, and heavier. My second thought was the kind that hits low in your gut like a dropped stone. Bear. Without thinking, I ducked back into the tent, heart pounding. Every bit of my buzz instantly evaporated. My hands fumbled through gear and clothes until I found my flashlight. I clicked it on, stepped back outside, and there it was, a black bear, 5 feet away. It was staring straight at me, its body still and massive in the beam of my flashlight. Its eyes caught the light and shone, twin orbs glowing in the darkness. I froze. So did the bear. The space between us felt like it was filled with electricity, some invisible thread stretching taut with tension. My hand tightened on the flashlight. I didn't move. The bear didn't either. Then, just as quickly as it appeared, it turned and loped off into the darkness. I exhaled. Maybe for the first time in a minute. My heart was hammering so hard I could barely think straight. I backed toward the fire, keeping the tent between myself and whatever direction the bear had gone. I stood there for a while, listening for movement, trying to decide what to do. Go to bed? No chance. Not now. About 10 minutes later, I heard it again. This time, a loud metallic thud from the garbage box on the edge of camp. He was back. Our garbage box was a makeshift structure built to keep animals out. Wooden sides, a heavy lid, latched when people remembered. It smelled like food scraps, grease, empty beer cans, and everything else that attracts wildlife from miles around. I figured I could scare the bear off if I approached slowly. I had my flashlight, but in my infinite, booze-clouded wisdom, I left it by the fire and decided to check it out in near total darkness. Real smart, right? Like the horror movie character who walks into the basement calling, "Hello," I crept through camp, eyes scanning the gloom. The stars were bright overhead, but the trees cast long, deep shadows, and my night vision was garbage. I reached the garbage box and paused. No movement, no noise. I figured the bear must have wandered off again. Carefully, I reached out to fix the lid, and there he was. The bear hadn't moved at all. He was crouched behind the garbage box. His body was completely hidden in the shadows. Only when he turned his head did I see the glint of his eyes. My hand was inches from his back paw. I jerked back instantly, heart slamming against my ribs like a sledgehammer. And then we locked eyes again. This time was different. We weren't caught in the sudden surprise of the first encounter. We had both seen each other now. We both knew the stakes. And in that moment, somewhere between primal fear and mutual curiosity, something passed between us. I don't want to sound mystical or overly romantic, but I swear I saw something human in those eyes. Not in a literal sense. He wasn't some reincarnated spirit or shapeshifter, but in the way he looked at me. Not with blind aggression or confusion. He was thinking, calculating. I could feel it. It was a moment of perfect clarity. This wasn't a wild monster. This wasn't a villain. He was just a bear, a living creature doing what bears do, looking for food, exploring his world. He didn't want to fight any more than I did. We stared at each other, both of us perfectly still. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and too loud. I could hear the faint rustle of trees in the wind. For a few seconds, maybe 5, maybe 10, We existed in the same space, the same moment, equals in the dark. Finally, I shouted, something loud and guttural. I don't remember what exactly, and the bear bolted, crashing through the underbrush and disappearing into the trees like a shadow with weight. But he wasn't gone for good. I sat by the fire the rest of the night, flashlight in hand, my nerves coiled tight. Every 30 minutes or so, I'd hear movement, spot those glowing eyes again at the edge of the woods. Each time, I'd get up and make noise, shouting, clapping, whatever I could do to convince him it wasn't worth it. Eventually, the eastern sky began to lighten, a soft gray blooming behind the trees. I hadn't slept a wink, but I was still wide awake. At around 7 a.m., the rest of camp started to stir. I grabbed another coffee, pulled on my boots, and got ready to plant trees for the final day of the season. Physically, I was exhausted. Emotionally, I was on a high I still can't quite explain. The fear, the awe, the unexpected stillness of that shared moment, it stayed with me. Still does. It reminded me of something important, that we're not separate from nature, not above it, not beyond it, not rulers of it. We're just a part of it, a thread in a much bigger tapestry. That night changed the way I see the forest, the way I see animals, hell, the way I see myself. There's something grounding about realizing that a creature like that, a black bear, powerful and wild and utterly free, can look at you and you can look back and just for a moment, understand each other and survive it. On the second to last night of a tree planting season, I had a close, silent encounter with a black bear at our bush camp in Saskatchewan. Inches from its paw, we locked eyes and shared a moment of mutual awareness and respect. I spent the night keeping him at bay and left the experience with a deeper appreciation for the natural world and our place in it. Last year, my friend and I set off on a long road trip that would take us all the way to New Mexico. We wanted to rough it, camp most of the way, get off the beaten path, and really feel like we were in it. No itinerary, just maps, gas stations, and whatever random campground pamphlets we could find along the way. Our first night out, we decided to camp in Jefferson National Forest in West Virginia. We'd grabbed a crinkled pamphlet from a gas station that mentioned a place called White Rocks Campground. The name sounded serene, peaceful, maybe even beautiful. So off we went. It was more than 25 miles down a winding dirt road into the mountains. Nothing but trees, gravel, and dust. We were deep in the boonies, and the deeper we drove, the more isolated it felt. Not the kind of peaceful isolation you look forward to on a camping trip. A heavier kind, one that prickles at the back of your neck. The only vehicle we saw for miles was a truck that followed us for about 15 minutes before taking a turn down another gravel road. We passed a coal processing plant with a sign out front that read, 62 days since last on-site incident. The place looked hollow, industrial, and long abandoned. The only people we saw, if you can even call them that, were standing on the side of the dirt road, huddled around a plastic bin they'd set on fire. Not a campfire, a bin. Just flames licking the air while they stood silently, watching us drive by. It was weird. Weird enough that we should have turned around. But we didn't. We laughed it off. We're just city girls freaked out by a little backcountry, we told ourselves. The kind of lie you say out loud to make it feel less real. When we finally reached the campground, something felt off immediately. It was completely empty. Not one car, not one person. 30 sites, all deserted. We drove around, slow and cautious, thinking we might see someone eventually, but nothing. No campers, no rangers, no signs of life. We picked a random site and started to unpack. That's when it hit me. The silence. You always expect some noise in the woods. Birds, bugs, wind through the leaves. But this was dead quiet, like someone had hit mute on the entire forest. I love the woods. I've never felt afraid in nature. Never felt like I didn't belong. But standing there, I had one crystal clear thought. We should not be here. Still, we tried to shake it off. My friend started pitching the tent while I got a fire going. We both kept stopping to listen, both sensing something just beyond the trees. My friend tried to lighten the mood. "At least we'll hear someone coming," she said, motioning toward the crunchy leaf litter all around us. It was a nervous joke, but it held truth. The silence made every sound 10 times louder. Dusk turned to dark. The fire was built. The tent was up. We sat down together and tried to enjoy it, our first night on the road. She pulled out a book and started reading aloud. I listened, but I kept sweeping my headlamp into the woods, every time half expecting to catch something, someone in its beam. My stomach was tight. I've never been paranoid in the forest before, but that night I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching us. Finally, we said screw it. Let's just go to bed, we agreed. No ghost stories, no stargazing. We doused the fire, climbed into the tent, zipped up the door. I ran to the car to grab the one knife we had and kept it close inside the tent, just in case. Just in case what? I didn't know. My friend pulled out her phone to check for reception. Nothing. I told her it was useless. No signal up here, but she tried to call her boyfriend anyway. The call failed to connect. And right then, almost like on cue, footsteps. Not subtle, not from a distance, 20 feet away, crunching through the leaf litter with weight. Deliberate, heavy, booted footsteps. They came from the left side of the tent. They didn't build gradually. No rustling or snapping twigs in the distance. Just bam, right there. Like someone had been standing behind a tree, watching us for who knows how long, and decided now was the time to move. We froze, completely. Our eyes locked in silent panic. The footsteps circled the back of the tent. Then they stopped. No animals make footsteps like that. This was someone. My friend didn't even hesitate. She grabbed the knife and her headlamp, unzipped the tent, and stepped out like a damn warrior. I stayed frozen inside, listening, holding my breath. She swept the trees with the headlamp. Wide arcs of white light, cutting through the black. But nothing. She stood there, maybe 45 seconds, before ducking back in and saying what we were both already thinking. "We're getting the fuck out of here." We packed faster than I've ever done anything in my life. In 10 minutes, our tent was down, our gear was thrown in the back seat, and we were flying out of there. Every second, I expected to feel hands grab me from the dark or hear more footsteps breaking through the leaves. I kept imagining hill people, the kind you hear about in horror movies, waiting in the trees, watching, choosing their moment. But we made it to the car. We tore down that dirt road, kicking up dust and gravel, heartbeats in our throats. And then we saw them. 2 black trucks, dirty and parked off the road, just far enough into the trees to not be obvious, but visible if you were looking. They were not there when we arrived. They weren't near any homes or turnoffs, and they were pointed in the direction of the campground. There was no one standing around them, but we didn't stop. We didn't even slow down. We just drove. We made it to a cheap motel hours later, somewhere in Blacksburg. Still wired, still jumpy. We told the man working the front desk what had happened, and to our surprise, he was kind, understanding. He even handed us a bit of money the next morning when we checked out, told us to use it for another motel if we needed. I told him I'd leave a good review, and I did. That night changed me. I can remember every single moment. The stillness, the silence, the sound of those footsteps. The feeling that we were being hunted. It wasn't the woods that scared me. It was whatever or whoever was out there watching. If you take anything away from this, let it be this. Don't go to White Rocks Campground. And if your gut tells you to leave, leave.